Fantastic. And now, Professor, moving to your latest book, this wonderful, The Power of And, purpose and profits, stakeholders and shareholders, society and markets, humanity and economics, and business and ethics, if I'm not wrong. So, in your book, Professor, my question is, how far have we managed to move away from the traditional story of business, and how close in the corporate world are we nowadays to this new story of business beautifully described in The Power of And?
Well, thanks. Let me say a word about how we wrote that. I got invited in the waning days of the Obama administration. I got invited to this meeting at the White House. I think this is probably in the book, with all the people that had proposed revisions to the way we think about the sort of old story of business or capitalism, and people who did ESG and impact investing and social entrepreneurship and B Corps and conscious capitalism, et cetera, about 40 or 50 people there. Tom Perez was leading it. He was Secretary of Labor. And, we got off on what's the right brand? What's going to be the sort of new story. And as I sat there for that, we had a couple of meetings. I began to think this was the wrong question. I thought a better question is, what are the 4 or 5 things that we really need to change? And we didn't need, it seemed to me, to throw out the old story, but the old story was incomplete and it radically needed to change. And then my 2 colleagues, Bobby Parmar and Kirsten Martin, and I sort of sat down and thought about this, and those 5 things were what we came up with. Now, I'm sure there are other ways to say it, but regardless of what the final brand turns out to be, I don't really care. It's got to deal with those 5 things. And I've always thought, look, this is about how to build and run a great business, and so this version of stating it the way that we do, it's not a lot different. The ideas were there in that paper I wrote in 1977. That's why I said I've only had kind of one idea, but I think for the times, this is a decent statement, because we've gotten a sort of perfect storm. If you go back to the 13 years or so global financial crisis, 13, probably 15 years, and the effects of the global financial crisis, which, again, we still see played out in the world. And you think about the fracturing of politics, and how, in many societies, it's one of these, yes, it is, no, it isn't, left versus right. You've had experience with this in Brazil. We certainly have here. There's very little compromises, very little kind of working together to solve problems. It's etc. If you think about some of the issues around that, issues about poverty and homelessness, and certainly here, issues around racism and gender discrimination, and of course, global warming. I don't know anybody who's argued coherently, I know how we're going to solve all these things. Let's double down on shareholder value. So I think that way of thinking is kind of over. I don't think there's any going back. So I unlike many of my colleagues, I think we've passed the tipping point. And that's not to say that shareholder value isn't important. Again, I actually believe in that. I'm going to retire in a few years, and I'd like some investments to pay off. So, I'm in favor of shareholders, because I am one in my retirement accounts. But we know that business has to be a part of solving these problems. Business is a societal institution. All of you with your businesses have effects on society that whether you want to be or not, you're responsible for your portion of those effects. Now, responsibility is a tricky idea. There's enough of it to go around. So, usually it's hard to say, well, one company is responsible for this. Sometimes you find that, but sometimes you don't. And the other piece to this is, if I were to tell you we have a real ethics issue, let me ask, how many of you thought I was about to talk about a company that has invented something really cool that makes our lives better? I know the answer to that, no one. Well, why? Because we tend to think about ethics as the bad stuff. But wait, if business gets credit for the bad stuff, and it shouldn't it get credit for the good stuff as well? And so but the old story, see, can't do that. The old story has business and ethics separate. If I say I teach business ethics, people have to kind of manage not to laugh. They have to say oxymoron, two words, you put them together like jumbo shrimp or American football, or I didn't know business had any, or, must be a short course, or when I heard in a bar in Copenhagen, I was talking to somebody and he said, what do you do? I said, I teach business ethics. And they said, oh, that's a theoretical subject, isn't it? The old story can't handle that. So you need a way to think about business so that thinking about ethics is kind of second nature, because the thousands of business people I've met all over the world, for the most part, want to do the right thing. Entrepreneurs certainly don't start companies to make as much money as they can. Entrepreneurs start businesses because they're on fire about something. If I have students who say, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to grow it and flip it and become a billionaire, I tell them, hey, you better get a job, because it's a hell of a lot easier to make money getting a job than it is starting a business. More than likely, you're going to fail. It's going to be years before you actually make very much money. And unless you really got fire in the belly, you're going to run out of gas pretty soon. So I see business as this wonderful institution about how we figure out how to create value for each other, about how we can literally, dream up stuff nobody ever thought of. I mean, Christ, I have this iPhone here. Think for a minute about what human beings had to do to get to iPhone. We're kind of souped up chimps and bonobos, and we came down from the trees in Africa at some point. And how did we get to iPhone? We literally had to invent vocabularies and discover them. We had to invent the ideas about metal or glass, not to mention the magic of the insides of this stuff. And that's who we are. Human beings invent vocabularies to solve our problems. And we live in a world not of scarcity. We live in a world of abundance, of an abundance in terms of what's up here, what we're able to do. And the idea that we always take the world as we see it and make trade-offs, etc., I don't accept that, because I don't think that's the way business works. Yes, sometimes you have to make trade-offs, no question about that, because you just can't figure it out. But if that's all you do is look for trade-offs, I am certain that's all you will find is trade-offs. The trick here is, how do we engage our creative imagination so that we can find ways to solve our problems that don't involve trading off one with another. That was why we tried to emphasize this no trade-off idea in The Power of And.